You are listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network.
من هناك لشوارشتايجر
Va a pegarle el Ronaldinho Gaucho. Ya lo hace. Pierna derecha, directo al arco. ¡Golazo! ¡Golazo!
This is Soccer Today, live on SPN Radio, your new live show about the beautiful game in all its glory, with Duane, Rollins and Kevin Laramee. MLS, EPL, La Liga, Champions League, all is fair game. Powered by the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us at sportspodcastingnetwork.com.
In Major League Soccer, there are a few players that you really only need one name to know who you're talking about. And one of those is Dax. Everyone knows who you're talking about when you say Dax, a legend in this league at this point. And he was traded yesterday during our show. So the bad luck rule of podcasting did not apply. It didn't happen after we were done recording for once. But nonetheless, we need to explore this a little bit more today. And joining Kevin and I, Kevin's on the line, by the way, from FourFourTwo is Paul Tenorio. How you doing, Paul?
I'm doing all right. Thanks for having me, guys.
Let's just start with the trade. It came down the pipe and caught me a little off guard. Thought he was a pretty valuable part of a very good New York Red Bulls team last year. Why do you think that the Red Bulls were interested in moving on?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think it's an interesting question. You look at this team, and certainly they feel as though let's start with this. They have been at the top of the Eastern Conference over the last 2 years. So things have worked very, very well. And yet they haven't been able to get over the hump. So there has to be change. When Dax McCarty went out with a broken leg for 2 months during the season, Sean Davis, a homegrown midfielder, stepped into the lineup and played well. And this is a kid who is, he's 23 years old. He makes a fraction of what Dax McCarty makes, and he gives you not Dax McCarty production, but he gives you a quality starting player in MLS. And so when you've got a player like Sean Davis waiting on the bench, and you've got a young 17-year-old in Tyler Adams who looks ready for a bigger role, I think they looked at this as a chance to move some money off of the cap, to give two young players a chance to develop. And then that sets up, for a move down the road. If they want to make a bigger move, they've got the cap space to do it. But, we talk all the time about wanting to trust your young homegrown players and to give them the responsibilities on the field. And I think this is an example of a team doing that, and maybe not even as much with Sean Davis because of his age. But I think you'll see Tyler Adams playing a bigger role as well as you're 17 years old, stepping into the spot that Sean played this past year. I mean, you got to remember they have Champions League and Open Cup and MLS. So, this is, I think, just kind of moving the club forward within the roster.
All right, fair enough. And we'll come back to that homegrown stuff in this conversation because that's very interesting. But I do want to move to the other side of the ledger on this. What in your mind is what attracted the fire to Dax?
Well, I gave the positive spin there for the Red Bulls. I think it's very, very clear that the fire won this trade. This is a team I saw up close last season. I'm on the sideline for their home games, and the biggest problem with this fire team, the biggest problem was they could not control the game in the midfield. They didn't have anyone that could dictate the tempo. They didn't have anyone that could slow the game down when it needed to be slowed down. They didn't have anyone who would demand the ball and be able to essentially control the game for them. And they realized that was a big problem as well. So they went out and they signed Juninho to start, and Dax is the missing piece. And it's interesting. I was having a conversation with someone about the fire, and I thought that they needed somebody who could kind of do both. They needed someone who could be a sixth, and they needed someone who could also connect from the back line to the forward line. And the person posed to me an interesting question: who in MLS does both very well? And That's not really how this league works. There isn't that kind of box-to-box playmaker, if you will. But what you do see a lot of is teams with a very good number 6 and a very good number 10. The Fire went and got the very good number 6. They don't have a number 10. I think they're kind of hamstrung a little bit. They have Michael DeLue, who plays as a shadow striker underneath, who kind of sort of plays that role. It makes it difficult to play with a number 10 when you have a player like that. But you go and get a player in Dax who's going to command the field, who's going to eat up space in front of your back line, and he's going to dictate the game for your team going forward. And on top of that, this is a team that really lacked, I think, a certain level of leadership that they really felt that they needed both on the field and off the field. And there's no doubt, there's no question that Dax is considered one of the most respected leaders in Major League Soccer, and certainly was that in New York.
Dax McCarthy, a cult figure, a very outspoken player, was working with MLSsoccer.com in the postseason after the Rebels were eliminated for their online broadcast. When you're looking at Dax McCarthy, Paul, how did he take yesterday? How did he take the news, in your opinion? Is it a positive move for him? Does he see the Fire rebuilding, or does he see him leaving in one of the best teams in the Eastern Conference to maybe one of the worst in the Eastern Conference?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to speak for Dax. I haven't spoken to him about the move, and I think it's difficult to gauge what someone feels about something. I will say, look, being in professional sports is a very difficult lifestyle, and we look at a lot of times you see and you look at the positives of it, right? You get to play soccer for a living. That's your job, and it's not really a job. If you talk to anyone in soccer, they joke. I've never worked a day in my life, Adrian Heath says. He's been playing professional soccer since he was 15 years old, or coaching. But on the flip side of that, you lose some control of your life. You miss big moments in people's lives during the course of the year, weddings and things like that, because you have games. And on the other side of things, you're in very little control over where you play and where you live. So, Dax McCarty got married on Saturday. And now on Monday, he's learning that he and his new wife, are going to have to pick up their lives and move to a new city. And they had just 2 days after the high of their wedding to hear that news. So I can't imagine that's easy. I got married just about a year ago, and I remember already how tumultuous life is when you're going through a wedding and when you're getting married and all the things that you have to do before and after. So I can't imagine it's easy to hear that you're moving to a new city. But again, I haven't spoken to Dax, so I don't know what his perspective is going to be. You're right. I mean, he's going from a team that finished top of the East the last 3 years to the team that finished bottom of the East the last 3 years. Do you sit back and evaluate whether you think this Fire team is the same as it was last year? I think you have to. And I do think that when you look at the fact that they've added Dax, they've added Juninho, and they've added Nikolic up top, that it is a different team. But I'm not going to speak for how Dax feels about the move.
On one part of your article that really was interesting to me and to Duane yesterday, Paul, article available on 442, is when you talked about the amount, the 400,000, and it's something that we were all taking by surprise over the last few weeks. The transparency on TAM and GAM that are been shown by Major League Soccer so far in the new year. Are you surprised by the announcement of the numbers?
No, I'm not surprised by it. I had heard this is a conversation that's been ongoing around the league for a couple of years, and I will give credit to Major League Soccer. They have sought input from journalists who cover the league about what needs to change, what can make coverage better. This has certainly been at the top of the list, transparency of allocation money. And I don't know whether it's a direct result of those conversations with journalists over the last couple of years. But we had been told that the league felt the same, that the league felt that this was something that had to change, and that there were a lot of conversations behind the scenes to push the league in this direction. So to a certain extent, you have those conversations for 2 years and you believe it's never really going to happen. But it's definitely a game changer for the league in a lot of ways. I think in the way that the league will be discussed publicly now by the fans changes. And I think that for the media, it's a game changer. We can now do our jobs better. We can tell people whether we think it's a good trade or a bad trade because we have actual context for what the trade is. And I think that's huge. I think that you see that in every other professional league in North America. And now finally Major League Soccer can join that discussion.
Paul, that's turn our attention back to the Fire a little bit. They've been very active in the past week or so, trying to move up in the draft, or move down in the draft in some cases to get money. I guess we now kind of know what was happening there. What is your overall impression of the Fire's direction right now?
Yeah, I think it's positive. First of all, there's nowhere to go but up, right? Finishing where they have the last 2 years. They know that they are on the clock here. They have to have good results early in the year. And I have been a believer that it takes time to build a real winner. I've said that when I was talking about Orlando City. I've said that when talking about Minnesota United and Atlanta. And I feel the same way about Chicago. It's difficult in this market because they've rebuilt, quote unquote, several times. Started and stopped. And so for 7 or 8 years now, the fans have heard it takes time. And yet Nelson Rodriguez and Veljko Paunovic have had only 1 year and now another offseason. So I've always felt that if they are given time to execute, then we can start to judge. And I thought that this offseason was a big part of that. Last year, they added some pieces I thought were very, very quality. Michael Delu, I think, is an incredibly underrated player in this league who's going to score double-digit goals this upcoming season. Very, very, very smart, very driven, a strong leader, was very successful at Groningen in Holland. Johan Kappelhoff, definitely an underrated center back, reads the game very well, can play right back as well. I think his best spot is center back. A really strong addition. And Brandon Vincent had an up and down year. I think if he can get his confidence back, he's a player who can be quality. So you look at those additions, and I'll even add Louis Solignac in there, who fit much better with the Fire than he did in Colorado. Now you look at this offseason, and you add in Dax McCarty, you add in Juninho in midfield, and you add in Nikolic, who, if you look at his goal scoring record in Europe, is if he can score even at close to that rate, he's going to be a star in this league. So they've added a lot of really, really good pieces, and I feel like they finally have a core. The goalkeeper Bava as well from Uruguay. People I've talked to familiar with South American football say he's a really high quality goalkeeper, very good in service, which has been an emphasis for Veljko Paunovic. So all of these pieces are starting to come together. Now they still have work to do. I still think they need a starting right back, and they need to find some quality there. I still think they need to add some depth at right wing and get a little bit of pace. And I still think that this team will be better if they add one more quality starting center back. Those aren't as dire as the midfield pieces, but it does show that there's still work to be done. I just think that that right now from the outside, yeah, it looks a little bit more positive.
It does take time, of course, but I think that the Chicago fans should look at the example of what's happened in Toronto in 3 seasons to go from a team that was very much as bad as the Fire was at the end of 2013 to, well, Stephen Fry's fingertips away from an MLS Cup. Paul, let's go back to that homegrown comment that you made earlier. You look at the Supporters Shield champions in Dallas and the amount of homegrowns that they've relied upon. The Eastern Conference regular season champions and the Red Bulls, a lot of homegrowns there. TFC uses a lot of homegrowns. You look at a player like Jordan Morris, homegrown at Seattle, the MLS Cup champions. Sports is often a copycat league. Do you think that we'll see some of these clubs that have been reluctant to fully buy in on the homegrown side to start to change their tune now that they've seen success with it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the ultimate goal for every team is to produce homegrowns. It's just a matter of whether or not you do. You know, if every team had the talent that FC Dallas did, I think you'd see maybe not as many homegrowns. That's definitely a part of the philosophy of Fernando Clavijo and Oscar Pereira, but you'd see more quality signings. Same with the Galaxy and the Red Bulls. Those are 3 of the deepest talent pools in this league. But I think ultimately this is, you know, a lot of times this is cast as a Major League Soccer problem, and I don't think that's true. I mean, if you look in Europe, how easy is it for a homegrown player to break through at Manchester United? How easy is it for a homegrown player to break through at Chelsea or Arsenal or in any of the big leagues. You see it more in Italy. You see it more in Holland, certainly. But it's much more difficult to do so in Spain and England. And even Germany is very, very good at bringing players through. But, I look back at Marcus Rashford. 8 players had to be injured before Rashford was given a chance, an opportunity to step in at forward for the first team. And look, he's proved to be a quality player and a player capable of being a star in the Premier League and going to the Euros with England. That doesn't happen unless multiple injuries happen above him on the depth chart. And I think it shows that in this world, in football right now, jobs are so perilous for coaches that they hesitate to put these young players in because they don't have the time to grow along with these players. They need to win now. And the same is in MLS. There may not be promotion or relegation, but there are the playoffs. And the playoffs is the red line. That is where you're judged as the coach in this league. And if you're not getting to the playoffs, you're getting fired. And so it's very difficult to trust the process and trust yourself and trust your team that you'll have enough time to put those kids in and allow them to grow and develop because they're going to make mistakes. I think you'll see more of it. I think the biggest driver of change is going to be that the owners understand and have been told that if you invest millions into your academy, that you will turn a profit because you can turn a profit with players. Well, that profit does not come unless you put the players on the field, unless they succeed, and unless you can sell them. And so I think you will see more and more owners understanding and pushing for more young players to play, even if it means that they have some more ups and more downs before they get to the ups on the first team. But it's going to be driven by the ownership.
You mentioned, Paul, trusting the process, and we're just a few days removed from the draft. Which team, if any, surprised you or interested you with their draft pick or their move at the draft?
I think there were a couple teams that were interesting. Portland and New York both moving into the top 4 I thought was very interesting. New York paid a hefty price to go get Jonathan Lewis out of Akron. So that was an interesting move. I'm very intrigued to see where they put him in the lineup in midfield, how they make that work. He's a quality player for sure. And again, I think if you look at Portland, this is a team that right now this offseason has made a clear idea that they want to get younger. They've added multiple players from T2. They moved up in the draft to get Jeremy Ibobise. So this is a team that's getting younger, and I think that's always intriguing when you see essentially, I think in a way it's them putting their hands up and saying, okay, we won a cup with one team. We tried to make that last one more season, but it's time to hit the reset button in a way and bring in some fresh blood. And so I'm very interested to see what happens in Portland with Milano back down in Argentina. I think they'll look to add another winger if they can. But that's one team that I'm very interested to see this upcoming season.
Paul, my last question I will ask you today. Yesterday, Patrice Bernier and the Montreal Impact announced a re-signing of Patrice Bernier for this season and also announced that it will be his final professional season. I'm interested to know your perspective of Patrice Bernier from your side of the border with his MLS career and how he is perceived.
Well, I think he's perceived as a quality player. Certainly he's somebody who we know means a lot to the Montreal community, to the Montreal Impact and that football club. I was really impressed. I think you want to know the quality of a player at his age to do what he did last year in the playoffs. I think surprised a lot of people, including myself. I thought that he would be a liability in central midfield against some of the better teams, against teams like New York. And instead, a ton of ground. His ability to pick out a pass from deep in midfield was huge for the Impact, and he ended up being one of the better pieces for that run. So, certainly I think he will go down as one of the better players in that club's history, and I think it's always good to see when a player is able to end their career with the team they spent a lot of time with, and I think it's a good sign too that the Impact will keep him involved by allowing him to coach in the academy.
Paul, just to wrap, I'm interested to get your take on what's happening in Minnesota. they're kind of going about things much differently than Atlanta is. They don't plan, at least by all accounts, to sign a DP. They seem to be looking sort of to create more of a team first sort of rah kind of environment, as far as I can tell. What is your take on the way Minnesota United is going about building their expansion team?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. And it's definitely got to be a team first mentality, but that's because they don't have the money, right? They don't have the budget to go spend big like Atlanta. They're not going to try to outspend Toronto or NYCFC or the Galaxy. This is a team that's going to be built more like Sporting Kansas City, more like the Columbus Crew. And I think you're going to see that's going to have to be the way that they go forward. Now, they only have 15 players on the roster right now, so they have a lot of work left to do. They don't have a starting goalkeeper. I think that they still need a right wing. They still need a right back. They still need a center back depth. They need defensive midfield help. I think they really need a left back starter to challenge Justin Davis that they brought up from the NASL. So they have a lot of work left to do. And I think it's worrisome. I feel for Adrian Heath because, it's going to take time with an expansion team, like I said, to get things together. But also, if you don't have enough quality in that team, if you rely too heavily on the NASL team, and I do think you'll see 3 or 4 signings coming from that NASL team, I think it becomes very difficult to win in Major League Soccer in your first season. So they certainly have their challenges, and it's going to be, I think they're going to need to go and look to make a bigger signing in the summer if they don't do it in the next couple weeks. You can work on a budget, and that's fine in Major League Soccer, but even Columbus and even Kansas City go and sign quality players in the $1 million range. And Minnesota hasn't done that yet. And they need to. And I don't think that they're going to be successful until they add those 1 or 2 players that can make a difference in this league. You need that in your team. And right now, I don't think they have that. We'll see whether Christian Ramirez can make the transition to Major League Soccer as a goal scorer. But I still think you need to go spend that $1 million to $1.5 million to go get either a playmaker or a forward who will be a game changer for you in this league, and Minnesota doesn't have that.
Yeah, I have a lot of people up there that I consider friends, and I'm a little worried about what their season's going to look like, Paul. But we'll see, as you say. Anything at 442 you want to promote before we say goodbye?
Oh, I just, we're working really hard at 442 USA. I hope you follow what we're doing, on Twitter at 442 USA. A lot of content every day, and I'm really looking forward to getting this season rolling. And my Monday column every Monday, try to pack it with news and interesting stories. So keep an eye out for that.
All right, one of the best. We appreciate your time as always, and we'll talk soon, Paul.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me on.
You are listening to Soccer Today, live on SPN Radio. Visit sportspodcastingnetwork.com for more.
I'm terrified for Minnesota, Kevin. Terrified.
Yeah, right. Well, they got Ibarra back, so maybe Ibarra will step up in Major League Soccer. It'll be it's I don't want to say experiment. I was going to say it, but maybe it's a new way, trying a different way, and we'll see if it's positive. Look at Adrian Heath and how Orlando came into the league. It wasn't half bad, so we'll see.
Yeah, well, they also had Kaká.
Yeah,
look,
true.
Yeah, they're right to a point. I find it's interesting because I think that the approach that Minnesota took, this wasn't on our lineup, but we'll go here for a second. I think the approach that Minnesota took might have worked 10 years ago, sort of to try and, get a lot. Well, that's the only way to do it about 10 years ago, right? But I mean, we live in a three DP era. When you look at the MLS Cup final, look at those two teams that are there. You look at, you're either going to spend on the academy side or you're going to spend on the DP side. Some teams are lucky enough to be able to spend on both, but I think that's the other worrisome part about this is I don't see a lot of movement on that side either for Minnesota. They're just sort of trying to do everything like they're still in the NASL in my mind, and I'm not sure that's going to work.
True, Duane, but I just had a flash. When we talk about professional leagues of other sports, I'm not going to mention one because that's not the idea of the comparison, but when you talk about leagues of upper of 2016, 30 teams, you have different ways to do things. You have teams that are going to have the big budget and just going to buy big players. Teams that are going to develop, going to have different ways to approach how you build your roster, how you build goals from your roster. Now having MLS going to 22 teams and going to continue to grow in the next 7 to 14 years, now we're going to see different ways to do stuff. It's not always going to be a cookie cutter like MLS 1.0, 2.0, and now 3.0. You need to do this. You need the DP. Maybe now we're going to see a league where you can have success different ways in the league. Maybe that's what Minnesota is going for.
Yeah, well, we'll see. And as I said, like the 55-1 guys are great, and they've always been good to me. And I've, been talking to Brian for years, so I do wish them well. I watch what's happening there, and there's a disconnect between what needs to happen in 2016 in Major League Soccer and what's happening there, in my opinion. We'll see. I've been wrong before. Some will say I've been wrong a lot before. So we'll just move on. Speaking of being wrong, there is a initiative in FIFA right now to investigate the possibility of putting post-game discipline in place for simulation. So if the referee gets it wrong, maybe they might fix it later on, Kevin. And this is something we've talked about before, and something that I think the video replay could be used for quite effectively is to punish players after the fact when they do something egregious to sort of manipulate the referees. And I kind of like this initiative. What are your thoughts on the idea?
I do a lot. And of course, the feasibility is going to be talked about. It's going to be very difficult. But here's what I would do, Duane. Here's how I would deal with diving in the world of soccer. It's a shame. It's the one caveat that people know I love soccer. They know that it's a passion for me. And when they're not a fan and they're talking to me about soccer, what's the first thing they talk to me about? Oh, yeah, they dive all the time. Oh, yeah, simulate all the time. I can't really be angry at it anymore because they're right. Yeah, they do. And it's a catastrophe that this has plagued the sport for so many years, and it's become a running joke, and it's about time something's done with it. There's not a lot of things you could do post games. You cannot necessarily eliminate goals or give back penalties and change results of game afterwards. That becomes very contentious for the rest of the standing and the table and everything. What you could do, Duane, though, is create something as the dive pool or the dive card bank. And if you have, example, a dive card after the game, somebody looks at the game at the end and he figured and it can be proven that you dove, you get a card. And after 4, you get maybe a few match suspension. After more, you get the rest of the season suspension. Hard, hefty fines. But there's maybe one of the only ways you can do it without affecting entire game results, because that is probably not what the goal is.
Yeah, no, look, I've kind of a disconnect. Well, it might sound like I'm contradicting myself here, but I sometimes have trouble with the referees giving yellow cards out for what they think is diving on the spot, because I think that that's an exceptionally difficult thing to consider and to figure out at the time, especially if the play is not obvious. There are times in the box where I've seen yellow cards come up for diving when it wasn't a dive, when the replay clearly shows that it was not. And I think that that's a case that the referee would need to have like absolute certainty to know. And if you did it post-match, at the very least, you knew that they were getting punished for it. And I think that in turn should make it that the referees actually give less cards out at the time, unless it is clearly obvious. Now, the one area this sort of, I think, is geared towards punishing people that sort of, cause a game to be changed in some way by drawing a penalty or whatever. But I'll tell you the one dive that makes me crazy. It's that fake headbutt dive. Otamendi did it against Everton, one of City's players. So it's not me.
When somebody touches you close, when it's just somebody touches you with no force and you react like you got shot.
Yeah, that one is the one that like you said, the people that are maybe that might be soccer fans that might be considering the sport are turned off by stuff like that because they think that, well, there's a lot of things they think, but they don't like it is the bottom line. So I think getting rid of that too is equally important than the stuff in the box, because like I say, there is time. And I used to referee hockey, and I refereed soccer a bit too, but I refereed hockey more at a higher level. And I used to say this all the time when people would be talking about diving. And at the time that I was refereeing, they were bringing in the idea that you would give a penalty for diving, is that there are times when a player was neither tripped nor dove. And I think that sometimes we're quick in the society to always do, oh, he dove, when maybe he just lost his balance in a natural way and fell down. That happens too. Last thought on this, and I always remind people like this, that the great tell, and we were taught this in refereeing school, the great tell on how to tell a dive between a flop is that when you legitimately fall, you put your hands down to brace it. When you dive, you usually throw your hands back. So if your hands go back, you're diving. All right, Kevin, any final thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it goes deeper. I think if you really want to eradicate diving from the game, it starts with education. It starts with training, formation, the way you educate your soccer players when they grow up. Do not teach them to dive. Do not teach them to take advantage of a moment when they can get that call. It's about the game. It's about the integrity of the game. And it's what it says how you sleep at night. I don't think players that dive feel like they're cheating the game and can't sleep at night. No, they probably sleep very soundly. But I think it's part of the education, of the training of the players to be taught to not go to the dark side, not try to embellish. Just be yourself out there. Just another deep thought here. Be yourself. Just play the game. Have some integrity towards the game. And I think that's important.
Yeah, cheating has been celebrated in the sport for a long time. I think that, Maradona, he sleeps fine at night, except for the nights he doesn't sleep. But the night he doesn't sleep isn't because he's guilty.
Yeah, no, exactly.
All right, take whatever you want out of that one. Let's take a quick break, Kevin. We're going to come back and talk about some exciting development in British Columbia soccer.
You're listening to Soccer Today on SPN Radio. You can find the on-demand version of this very show on iTunes, Stitcher, Feedburner, Podbay Player, Podbean, anywhere you get your podcasts under the Sports Podcasting Network feed. Subscribe to our YouTube page to make sure you never miss a live show talking about soccer today, the MLS postgame show, open lines after dark, 5 rings daily during the Olympics. Make sure you subscribe and give us a follow on Twitter at SportsPodNet and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network.
And welcome back. For years now, I, along with many other people, have criticized British Columbia soccer a great deal for one particular thing, and that was because even though they had the resources and the player pool out there to create a D3 league, a D3 standards-based league like League One Ontario, like the PLSQ, they did not. Well, last night they announced that in 2018 they are finally going to follow through with what they should have done years ago. But nonetheless, I won't be passive aggressive. What they are going to do in 2018 is great, and they are going to create a D3 standards-based league to join the PLSQ and League One Ontario in the Canadian Pyramid at that Division 3 level. 2018 stacking up to be a pretty exciting year in Canadian soccer, Kevin.
Yes, I think it's been overdue, Duane. How many years have we talking about this? I think it's been 3. From Two Solitudes to Soccer Today, we've been talking about League One, PLSQ, and the lack of the same level of soccer in British Columbia. Now everything seems to be falling into place and have that D3, not coast to coast. There's still some gaps in the middle and on the east side, but it's a start in 3 leagues, and maybe those teams eventually would be part of the openness of the Voyageurs Cup in the next few years and the rethinking of how that league is going to play now, especially with the USL now with Ottawa and the potential of the CPL and with the 3 League One, PLSQ, and the BC League. So it will be interesting. It's a great step forward, and it will be interesting to see If the Whitecaps will have their own league in there, maybe it's a potential like Toronto does, own team in the league. I mean, or if it's going to be counter Whitecaps and another group from the Vancouver area might want a team in that league. Or it's fascinating to me how a league in that province will take shape.
Yeah, look, the applications to join are they're taking them. They're going to take them under consideration in a pre-screening process that's happening right now. As I said, they're going to take a full year to build this, and they'll be ready to go in 2018. It does. Look, they got to do it right, and I think that if I go back to the launch of League One Ontario, they took an extra year, and a lot of people at the time thought that extra year might mean that things were in trouble. But what it meant is that they wanted to do it right, and they took the extra year and took the time to do it right. So I also applaud that BC Soccer isn't just going to jump in and try and get something going 4 months from now or something like that. They need to have the right programs, the right teams in place, and there are more than enough players out there to do that. And I think one of the best things about this, you mentioned the Whitecaps, and I do hope they are involved in some capacity, but I do also hope they're not involved too much, because one of the problems that I have with BC Soccer is the omnipresence of the Whitecaps everywhere. And a lot of Whitecaps fans get defensive when I say that. And again, I stress that isn't an anti-Whitecaps position. That is a pro-competition position. Look at Sigma here in the GTA. Sigma is one of the best things that could have ever happened to TFC, in the sense that it's driving them on the development front to be better, to have a legitimate competitor. And there are others too, but I point Sigma out because that's the one that most people will know. Legitimate competition in the market for development. That's good for the MLS team as well.
Well, the fact that you mentioned them is because of their track records too. Look at the players they have developed. Look at the MLS Super Draft for the last few years with product of Sigma. Look at on the field, the Kyle Laarns of this world. Those been produced by a Sigma. So a lot of results by Sigma that drives the conversation towards their name too, because look of what they have created, who they have created over the last few years.
Well, yeah, arguably Sigma has produced as many MLS players as any of the MLS academies. So, in fact, I don't think it's the argument, really. It's true. So there you go, Kyle Laarns alone. I know no Canadian MLS academy has produced a player of the same quality of Kyle Laarns. I guess Jonathan Osorio would be the next closest, and we all know the story there is he's one of those Jordan Morris type academy signings in which he's an academy player, but he mostly developed somewhere else. Stanford in Morris's case, and down in Uruguay for Osorio's case. But look, as I said, it's a great thing, and there's not much more to say other than, what's next on that front. And I think now that BC is on board, the next focus for Canadian fans will be to try and keep the pressure up on places like Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba. I think a Prairie League would make a reasonable sense. I'm not sure whether those provinces have enough. Alberta might, but by and large, I think that they would benefit from working together and creating a Prairie East and a Prairie West division or something like that. I mean, as long as we're going to fantasy dream this out, and then after that's done, then maybe we start to think about the possibility of getting something going in the Maritimes, which will probably be the final region that we tackle. But this, we talk a lot about the Canadian Premier League, and I was on a podcast yesterday, which I linked out this morning on my feed. It's an Eddie's podcast talking about the Canadian Premier League. But this side of it, the D3 side of it, to me is equally as important. I think in some ways it's especially important with the Canadian Premier League starting, and I have to think that part of BC's initiative is stemming from the fact that there will be a Canadian league for these players to graduate to after the fact. That has to be part of the impetus. And the other part of the impetus to getting in there is that, and I think that this is probably an indication that this is coming down the pipe, is the Voyageurs Cup participation, which is almost done deal now in terms of having the PLSQ League One Ontario, the Interprovincial Cup champion, will likely get an entry into the Voyageurs Cup, and having that carrot at the end of it is something that I think is really appealing to those D3 leagues. I know I've been told that the PLSQ was really one of the ones pushing the hardest for that, because a lot of their teams really require that possibility to help drive sponsorship money on their end. The potential that it could pay off down the line. A local investor puts whatever their furniture store on their front. I think of that because of the Laval thing. And suddenly they get the attention nationally if they get to a Voyageurs Cup game. So that's an important consideration as well, Kevin, and something that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I know you want to move the conversation to Canadian Premier League and what Paul Byrne has been doing over the last few weeks.
Yeah. Look, I thought I'd just have a touch because I had that long conversation, and I'm sorry, I don't have my notes in front of me, so I forget the name of the podcast. I'm really sorry, guys, but I did link it out this morning. I will again after the show. So if you're looking for it, I had a 40-minute conversation with the Canadian Premier League. So I encourage you to go listen to them and listen to what I had to say there. But I did think that here it'd be valuable to touch on it a little bit today as well. In terms of what news is happening, I think that the only real change that's been going on lately is that Paul Burns sort of having his roving caravan around the country to try and drum up support and interest for this. And he's going into a lot of what I would call secondary markets right now to try and talk about the possibility of getting groups up. And what that tells me, and what has been backed up by things that people are telling me, is that probably what's going to happen with this league is you'll have kind of an initial, what I'll call a soft launch in 2018 with maybe 6, maybe 7 teams in the major markets that we've been talking about all along. You know what those are: Winnipeg, Calgary, one in the GTA somewhere, Ottawa, Hamilton, and Regina. Yeah, and Regina, likely. So those are probably your launch markets, which we all understand, and we all have that natural tie-in with an existing professional sports group. But the league, if it's going to thrive, needs to be bigger than 6 teams. It needs to be bigger than 8 teams. It needs to probably be 12 to 15 teams eventually. And for that to happen, you need to find other markets and other investors out there that would probably come in on a more secondary expansion, that they might even as much as double it. And here's where I think Paul Burns' work's coming down the pipe. And we've been hearing a lot of him talking in Halifax. And I would include Halifax in that secondary market, second expansion kind of area. And, people that don't know, I've lived out there, so I can speak. Halifax is much smaller than you think. I think it's only a population of about 350,000 people. It's the whole region. If you consider the region all the Maritimes, you can maybe find 1 million people to draw from, but these are small places, right? The city of Mississauga is bigger than the province of New Brunswick. So that's kind of what we're talking about in terms of raw numbers here. And it would take me from Fredericton 4 hours to drive to Halifax. So you're not really going to drive 8 hours in a day to go attend a soccer game. Not most people anyway. So it's not as simple as snapping your fingers and making it happen out there. But the fact that he's going and having conversations like that are positive, because I think it shows that they understand that they need to get into all of these regions. And let's just ask you, Kevin, off the top of your head, forget the big cities. What kind of secondary markets do you think that this league should be targeting?
It's going to be funny because people are going to say that I consider Quebec City a secondary market, so I'm going to say Quebec City. No offense to our listeners in Quebec City. I do wish them a professional soccer team, and maybe the Premier League is the place to be, having their team in the PLSQ, I believe, this year with the Dynamo of Quebec. So maybe the evolution of that is having a Royal de Beauport implicated more, and because they've been a team that on the smaller levels over the last few decades have been successful back in that tournament of amateur teams in Quebec, or in Canada, winning those tournaments. So maybe their implication at the level and the base of fans they do have and the following they have gathered in the Quebec City and the sponsorship and the support from the community. So maybe that's important. The Dynamo, will see how the Dynamo does with the PLSQ, but heading to the Premier League, maybe that's a secondary market that would be worthwhile. You mentioned cities like Hamilton. I do feel like other cities maybe either closer to Toronto, or I don't know, maybe it's just because of my bias, maybe in Oakville or something cities with some soccer history, and Oakville has some history in the world of soccer locally. So that would be maybe a market that would fit the profile.
One of the biggest rumblings here is Vaughan. Vaughan is a suburb. Well, they'll hate it when I say that. They are the city above Toronto. It's kind of a suburban city above Toronto, but nonetheless, that has a very strong soccer history to it. It's where TFC2 currently plays at the Ontario Soccer Centre, although the Ontario Soccer Centre is located, you could throw a rock into the city of Toronto from where it is, but it is in fact in Vaughan. That is an area in a city in suburban Toronto that is getting a lot of attention. When the Canadian Soccer League existed back in the day, there were 2 Toronto-based teams. The North York Rockets were the secondary team, with Anthony Tutera was actually involved with that club. So that's where his love lies there. So I do think you'll probably see another GTA team and along with a Toronto proper team in the league when it launches, which will put Hamilton in there as well. If you consider them Golden Horseshoe as opposed to GTA, then it's a very close one. But if you want to go back to the secondary primary market conversations for me. I look at 2 other Ontario markets, and yes, I know that's Ontario focused, but you look at the population base here, guys, and that's why you have to do that.
Oh, yeah, exactly. It's how many, over 10 million people in province of Ontario?
Yeah, it's a big population base. And the 2 cities that jump out to me that are obvious targets would be Kitchener, Waterloo, and London. London's with their, well, it used to be Forest City, but now it's just London Soccer Club. They are immensely successful right now on both the men's and the women's side. I think they would be an absolute, they'd be an absolute top-notch club if they were given the opportunity and had the money behind them. And London is a fairly well-off city as well. So the potential to find good revenue sources there, sponsorship there, I think is pretty strong. And a city that is near and dear to my heart in terms of KW, the Tri-Cities, that's going to confuse American listeners. It's the Tri-Cities because there's a third city called Cambridge. It's also involved in Kitchener-Waterloo. But at any rate, they are an area that is about 1 million people in terms of the overall region, the region of Waterloo. 2 universities there, a high-tech area. That's where BlackBerry was initially launched from, that's where RAM is located. So this is, it's Canada's technology triangle, Canada's version of, San Francisco and the area there. So it's another, and it has a highly successful PDL team in KW United as well that is producing MLS players pretty consistently. So there's obviously both the money in that city, the population base in that city, and the soccer chops in that city in terms of an existing club that's working quite well. So that would be the 2 cities that I would point to first and foremost. And the reason it's near and dear to my heart is because I went to university there. That's the 2 cities that I would notice. And when you get out to the prairies, it's a little more complicated, although, because there's the cities they're small out there. And again, if you haven't lived, you don't really know. You look at some of the WHL, the Western Hockey League markets, and you think, oh, we could maybe put them there. And then you realize when you get there that there's 50,000 people that live there, right? That's not enough for a junior hockey team, but probably not enough for one of these teams. So I think that the markets up there are pretty much covered right now, other than maybe British Columbia, where you might be able to look at something in the interior, Kelowna or what have you.
And the way you might do that, though, is like the Rough Riders in the Canadian Football League do, is you brand yourself the province. You brand yourself as the Saskatchewan Premier League soccer team or the Manitoba Premier League soccer team, in a way that you draw a fan base from not just your city, but a little bit outside as well for diehards that are willing to drive those 4 hours. Well, it's there, and you represent them too by branding your team as such that it's inclusive for the entire province and maybe not just this local market.
Yeah, the Rough Riders are located in Regina. I am almost inclined when I think about the Saskatchewan initiative, and it's one of the big mysteries of the Canadian Premier League is what's happening in Saskatchewan. We always hear it connected. We don't really know much details about it. I would almost rather, since the Rough Riders are in Regina, almost rather than place the soccer team in Saskatoon, which is the other major city in Saskatchewan. Saskatoon is it's one of my favorite cities in the country. It's a funky town that has kind of a liberal backbone to it. It's got a lot of arts there. It has kind of a population base that would seem familiar around MLS supporters groups and other supporters groups out there, if you follow what I'm saying. So I think Saskatoon might be a better fit for the soccer team than Regina would, which is more of a government working class town that's a little more of a football town. So that's kind of where I lean on the Saskatchewan side of things. And I know that we have a lot of Saskatchewan listeners here because the Saskatchewan boys are crazy, but no offense, guys. But yeah, so that's what I think there. All right, Kevin, any final thoughts on the show? The day, Dax,
yes,
anything like that?
Something that we didn't mention last week, the Montreal Impact have named Jack Stern their goalkeeper coach for the first team. He used to be the FC Montreal goalkeeper coach. He was working as a U23 goalkeeper coach with West Bromwich Albion in the Premier League and in the championship a decade ago. Well, a little less than a decade ago, but before making his way to North America to try to have new life experience and continue to work in the world of soccer, he had a very successful goalkeeper career coach with West Bromwich and now with the Montreal Impact. And now, they mentioned that they're trying to find a way to keep Youssef Daha part of the club somehow, but they do thank him for his services. And the new goalkeeper coach for the Montreal Impact heading into 2017 is Jack Stern. And if you go back to the history of the website on After Woodworks, on multiple occasions I had the chance and the opportunity to interview Jack Stern. So you can go back in the archive and listen to great interviews that we did have with him.
It sounds like what they're doing with the former coach is that we're gonna pay you until you find a new job. Is kind of what that sounds like. But
Yeah, but
right.
Yusuf Daha has been on and off of the club twice over the last decade. Member of the furniture, you would say, a very implicated, very known character, a very beloved coach, and he's fun to be around. So Yusuf Daha might find still employment with the Montreal Impact, and that was in the press release last week.
Fair enough. All right. On that note, Kevin, I'm going to say goodbye on this icy Tuesday here in central Canada. Until that time, I'll let Kevin, as always, take the honors to say goodbye to the show.
Until tomorrow at 10 a.m. again live for the rest of the week, 10 a.m. So if you want to listen on YouTube live, 10 a.m. for the rest of the week. And until then, have a great soccer. You were listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us, sportspodcastingnetwork.com.